week on Quality Digest Live, we examine if the skills gap in manufacturing is fact or fiction.
Plus, what do you do when a bad system points fingers at good employees? We'll find out when we come back.
This week's sponsor of Quality Digest Live is Olympus NDT. The new OmniScan flaw detector is the latest product of Olympus NDT's dedication to developing hardware and software advances.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for October 25th, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Well, to kick off the show this week, we're going to take a look at the car of the future. And Dirk, this may be one that you want to pre-order right now. A special video report titled The Future of Mobility was recently released from Frost & Sullivan, the market research and analysis organization. And we're going to be playing the start of that video now, and you can see right there, I think.
It's the car of the future, buddy.
It's the old-timey car. Well, what they're doing here is they're kind of showing you the evolution of the car a little bit. But this shows you a little bit about the last time the car was kind of a breakthrough technology and how it replaced horses and things of that nature. But anyway, you can see that right now, and you can check out the video report if you like on the Frost & Sullivan site. There's a preview for it on their YouTube channel, and you can check it out. There's a story link below the player page on the story. You can click on the YouTube link through that and check it out. Okay, well, according to the research and the information in this report, in the not-so-distant future, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and robotics will combine to change our driving experiences into something that's currently unrecognizable. To start with, Frost & Sullivan expects that every new car will offer internet connectivity by next year, 2014, making automobiles the third most connected devices in the world, behind only mobile phones and tablet computers. Shortly thereafter, Frost & Sullivan predicts car manufacturers and a host of partners will provide an immersive and interactive environment for passengers in which your vehicle, which essentially at that point will be just a big mobile computer, will let you surf the web, listen to music, shop, schedule your day, attend meetings, and a whole heck of a lot more. All the while, robots will be safely taking you to and from your destination without you even having to drive.
Thank goodness.
At all. That's
Talk about
right.
distracted driving.
Yeah, especially if you've had a beer or two. But now at the Go Further with Ford media event in June, Ryan Day and I witnessed some of what the Ford Motor Company is attempting to do within this space. Now, what Ford and others are doing here is nothing short of recreating the driving experience, allowing connection-addicted customers and consumers to get their fix even when they're traversing from point A to point B. Now that all sounds great, I guess. But when I was a kid, and maybe you too, Dirk.
When I was a kid,
we were all supposed to be driving flying cars by now, right?
We're close.
That's what I thought. So anyway, I'll believe in the hands-off, robot-controlled, web-browsing vehicle, I mean mobility experience, when I see it.
All right. Well, speaking of automation, some articles just push the right buttons for people. One of this week's really immensely popular stories was from Mark Davidson of LNS Research. The article was entitled 28 Quality Metrics That Matter. As the article points out, and which all of us know, it's that effectively measuring, analyzing, and improving manufacturing metrics is not really as simple as it may appear. Although there are certain metrics that work well for specific job roles, it's often the case that multiple combinations of metrics are needed to make sure that a larger business goal is met. So, what are those metrics? Which ones really count? Now, this story happened to give 28 of them. We'll list a few of them here. But to find out what these metrics were, the Manufacturing Enterprises Solutions Association, MESA, some of you may have heard of that, and LNS Research sponsored research to help the manufacturing marketplace identify the most important metrics. As part of the most recent metric survey, as I said, 28 manufacturing metrics were identified as being the most utilized by discrete, process, and hybrid/batch manufacturers. So let's take a look at a couple of them. Under customer experience and responsiveness, we've got percent of on-time delivery. That makes sense. Manufacturing cycle time, how long it takes to make a single product, and time to make changeovers. how long it takes to switch from making one part to making a different part. This is related to single-minute exchange of dies for you lean guys. For quality metrics, we have metrics like yield and % of supplier quality incoming. That's an important one. For efficiency, there's overall equipment effectiveness and capacity utilization. There's also metrics for reducing inventory, ensuring compliance, reducing maintenance, increasing flexibility and innovation, and reducing costs and increasing profitability. As I said, 28 metrics in all that, according to Mesa and LNS, are the most utilized. Very popular article, and this is based on a survey. And if you would like to participate in the current Metrics That Matter survey, which, by the way, gives you 1 year of access to LNS Research's Performance Management Research Library. A lot of good information in that library, by the way. Go to the 28 Manufacturing Metrics That Matter story, shown below. At the very end of the story is a link to the next survey. And as I said, if you take that survey, that gives you 1 year's access to a bunch of research by LNS Research. So it's definitely worth, for a lot of reasons, participating in the survey. So there you go.
It's interesting because that was the most used metrics, but not necessarily the most effective metrics. Those are the metrics that are used the most. Doesn't really get into what the effectiveness of those individual metrics may be. Some are, I think, better than others. But
well, I think the assumption, and maybe this assumption's wrong, I think the assumption is if they're the most used, you would assume, maybe incorrectly, but you would assume that they're being used because they seem to be the ones that point out the most important stuff for manufacturers. Now, I suppose that could be a false assumption.
Well, I think it's good to know the 28 that people are using.
Well, there's some in there that I hadn't even heard of, so there's actually some interesting stuff in there.
Good stuff in there, so check that out. And again, as Dirk mentioned, that article right below the player page, the article I just mentioned earlier about the car of the future, right below the player page, and all of the other pieces that Dirk and I are going to be covering on today's show are right down there too. So after the show, check it out on demand and read those articles through. Okay. Well, now turning to our features for the week, a good article that we had this week called Manufacturing Truth at Manufactured Truth at Manufacturing Day by Tony Gilpin. And this story appeared in Thursday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now,
and originally was Gilpin is a reporter for
the Evanston News, I believe.
Evanston News, Evanston Journal, yes,
local
in Illinois,
in Illinois, and that's going to be important. It's going to be important part of this discussion here. We're going to have in a minute. Now, the author Tony Gilpin again attended Manufacturing Day in Evanston, Illinois, earlier this month, and as Dirk mentioned, her piece appeared in the Evanston, I believe it was the Evanston News, the local paper there. Now, this is a topic that we covered on the show before, and really what Gilpin's getting at here is a question. Is there a skills gap at play within the U.S. manufacturing industry? In other words, are there loads of great jobs out there for welders, for example? Welders seem to always be the example everybody uses, but it's a good example. Are there loads of great jobs out there for welders that are going unfilled because we just don't have enough trained professionals to fill those positions? Are we failing, in other words, to provide to industry the raw material, the personnel that they need to fill those jobs? Well, maybe. But maybe, as Gilpin points out, there's actually a wage gap at play, as much or even more so than a skills gap. Economics 101 will tell you that if an industry needs workers with a specific set of skills and they can't find them, what's going to happen? Wages are going to go up, right? They have to compete for those few people, so they're going to want to pay those people more.
I'll argue on that.
To do this job. Okay, but I mean, I think you can argue that way, though. That makes sense.
It makes sense.
Makes sense. If you need people in a specific position and you need to pay them, you're going to need to pay them more to bring them in and to compete versus other people who might be needing welders. But you know, we're actually not really seeing that, and I want to hear your counter to that in a minute because maybe you can help me understand a little bit more. Yeah. Well, what Gilpin's saying here and what she thinks is happening is that the skills gap is actually a canard. She used the term canard. It's misleading. It's actually maybe even an out-and-out lie perpetuated by manufacturers who want to offload the costs of training to communities and individuals themselves. Rather than having to train people internally and bear those costs, they want to say, okay, academia, government, people themselves, if you want to be a welder, train yourself. Come to us with the skills. We don't want to have to provide those skills to you. It's not cost effective. We want you to walk in and be able to do that for us. But think about it. Think about what that means now. Again, we talked about this in the past, this whole idea of the wage gap. Many times, those jobs that are requiring a lot of skills, a lot of training and experience, are paying 15 to 20 bucks an hour. Do the math and look at 2,080 hours a year of an average work year. You're talking about a job that's going to pay less than 40 grand gross.
Right.
Gross, not take home. Less than 40 grand a year gross, wanting a lot of experience perhaps and a lot of training. So does that make sense? Do wages have to grow in order to help fill the job gap?
Well, you got to look at the other side though too. And matter of fact, there's several references in that piece.
Yes.
In that piece, but I think the best one, the most balanced thing that she references is actually an article in the New York Times by Adam Davidson, "Skills Don't Pay the Bills."
Yes.
And what he points out in there is the flip side of this is, and he's interviews a manufacturer in there, Davidson does, is that, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could pay all our workers $30 an hour? Sure. Of course, if you did that, your product would be priced so high that nobody would buy them, so that ain't going to work. The flip side of this is like, sure, workers may want to get, or skilled labor may want more money. That's fair. That's in their own self-interest. But if a company can't pay because of overseas competition or maybe here competition, if they can't pay that amount because it would cost make their product cost so high, then they're not going to do it. I mean, you can't. I mean, the flip side, that's just economics, as they say.
Sure. Okay, but let's look at it. Let's look at another factor of this. She talks about Caterpillar as an example, which is an Illinois company, I believe, whose CEO is making $22 million a year. And I'm sure top management's not all making that much, but I mean, maybe some of that could come from, I mean, it's not going to come out of dividends paid to shareholders because that's not the way it's going to effectively grow the company.
Sure,
but maybe top management could spare shaving $1 million or $2 million off of their payroll a year.
Yeah, but here's my problem with this article. She starts with the premise, or she mentions in there, and a lot of her references do, that say, look, a lot of business people are saying the reason that unemployment is so low is that we don't have enough skilled labor. And she and some of the other commentators say that's hogwash. And I would agree. If you're trying to lay all the unemployment on the fact, wow, there's just no skilled labor, I would agree that's completely bogus. It makes no sense at all. But they're kind of glossing over the point, and the manufacturer that was interviewed in Davidson's story makes the point that, look, I'm looking for a certain skill level of people. I need these certain skill sets. I can only afford to pay them so much. So, and number one, I'm having a hard time finding these people. And when I do find them, yeah, I don't want to pay them maybe what they'd like to get paid, but that's just the economics of it.
Well, would that manufacturer be willing to front some of the costs of the training?
He talks about that. Actually, that's why I like this New York Times piece. He says, look, I've tried to do some in-house and I'm continuing to do some in-house training to bring up high school kids in order to maybe prepare them for these skilled jobs that I want. I'm willing to take on that cost, essentially, is what he's saying. Then he goes on to say is that the problem is a lot of these kids don't have the math background that they should have coming out of high school. And he points back to, look, we've got an education problem too. I got kids coming in here, I can't train them because they just don't have the math.
No, that's a fair point. I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, certainly the education system in this country has to bear a certain percentage of the responsibility too.
But Gilpin disagrees with that.
Well, and she does. She glosses over it. But I think you're right. I think that certainly we need to better prepare people to walk into those jobs and have the basic skills that are needed. And you know, we've seen companies like CSS, Connecticut Springs and Stamping, who has taken it upon themselves
to train
because they know that the local government's not going to do it. This is a great issue. I mean, I really appreciate Tony Gilpin's perspective here because it starts the argument we're having now, and there's, like you said,
there's a lot of
ways to look at this. I think it's a fair question. I think the bottom line we can all agree with is that we do need to have more support to fill these jobs. We do need more people coming into the industry, and academia, industry, and the government itself. I think all have to participate in
and how you balance paying somebody for their knowledge versus just the economics of, hey, you got to run a business and you can only pay your people so much. There's no, I don't think there's, actually, looks like we have a comment from a reader. If we can throw that up there.
Let's see what this is. Wow.
Whoa, a long comment. The article put out was biased to one part of the country. This was dealing a lot with Illinois, I agree. We got to go to trade school
back in the
80s, but still manufacturing is considered a lesser type of job by society, and I would add today. When society sees that people making items are as important as the people caring for them, then it might get the understanding how important it is and to quit looking down on it. Some of us are not college material, and yet I blow most ME and QE degree people out of the water with my 25 years of on-the-job experience. A degree is important, not saying it isn't, but when it gets too much importance, then the ability to see that it is not needed hurts people, and the skills gap seems worse than it really is. Yes, we need to get more training, but the biased article about Illinois does not give a good idea of what is going on nationally, not just local to her area.
Yeah, and Tony Ilpin, I mean, she's from Evanston. She's writing with.
She's writing locally,
local, and that's her perspective. And it's a fair point. It's a fair point that I think on-the-job training, people that have those hands-on skills over the course of this writer's case, 25 years, are going to trump a lot of the training that you may be able to provide for somebody walking in, but it doesn't mean you still don't want those people coming in.
Right.
You know, just because you have somebody who's trained there now doesn't mean you don't want people coming in to fill the pipeline when this gentleman or lady's going to leave at some point,
right.
and you're going to want somebody behind them to be able to step in and fill that job. So,
right.
So
it's good. Read the piece. Yeah. Actually, link out. She's got a ton of links in there that link out off to her source material. I encourage you to read the article, click on those links, and go read the source material. A lot of her source material is really interesting stuff.
Yep, good stuff.
Okay, moving on. One of our columnists, Matthew Barcelou, sent us a story that I think we all can relate to, at least at some point in our career, and that is when your boss or company sets performance standards that aren't really based in reality. I don't care if you're a salesperson or a production person. We've all experienced that. Sometimes you scratch your head and ask yourself, where did that number come from? In this case, Barcelou talks about a friend of his who's a forklift driver in a warehouse. His buddy recently got called on the carpet because he hadn't met the performance standard. Set it up. Warehouse people follow pick paths. These are routes that you follow to pick parts and return to the kitting area or the distribution point. You can have a single item order. That's pretty easy. You go to a single spot in the warehouse and you come back. Or you can have multi-item orders in which you have to drive to different parts of the warehouse to get each item and then return to the kitting area. The latter, obviously, takes longer. Generally, at the facility in question, Barcelou's friend, a forklift operator works both types of pick paths during a normal week. So the average time per pick kind of averages out. And in this particular case, Barcelou's friend spent 2 weeks only doing multi-item pick paths. Luck of the draw, bad planning, who knows, but the result was that he didn't, quote, make rate. Of course, a forklift operator being assigned only the more difficult paths is not going to make rate if that rate is determined by some sort of average. This, says Barcelou, is an ideal place to use a control chart. This was kind of a unique, at least to me, a unique using idea of how to use a control chart. He suggested creating an SPC chart for single item picks and one for multi-item picks. Each would have its own upper and lower limits. That might work. Your performance would be compared to whatever the upper and lower limits of the control chart for a single item pick or a multi-item pick. You could also create a control chart that plots all picks and so represents warehouse picking as a whole. Not only would either of these be more fair, but actually for the company's perspective would be a better idea because it would give them an idea of what is actually going on in the warehouse. It might also be a point out areas for improvement. For instance, to reduce, if they saw a lot of variation in their multi-point picks, they might look at using something like pick path optimization. This is software that actually helps determine what is the shortest route to get to all the different areas in the warehouse in order to pick all the parts, right? Because maybe they're taking random paths and sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter. They might see trends in the data. What does it mean, for instance, if pick times are increasing or decreasing? What does it mean if variation is increasing or decreasing? What do you see if you create a control chart for each operator, for instance? There's just all sorts of ways to look at the data. And the point is, as Barcelou points out, the entire situation sounds like management failed to get input from both the employees and, more important,
the process.
The process. What is the process saying? As Barcelou says, employees can run harder or drive faster in the case of forklift operators, but the process will continue to be whatever it is. And that's exactly right. So by studying the process, determining control limits, and plotting daily productivity in a control chart, the company's management could set up a system that takes into account any variability in the process and also set up something that is when they're setting performance levels, going to set at performance levels that are more realistic and set more realistic expectations for their employees. I mean, it's just a clever use of SBC charts, I thought.
I think so too, and I think the other thing it brought up to my mind was the idea of Deming's red bead experiment, right? I mean, they're kind of, in a sense, looking at these individual operators and beating them up over the fact that the system isn't really permitting them to do better work. They're saying, you're not doing good enough. I think in this case, in Barcelo's friend's case, it was 97% of his make rate, which caused him to be written up. Well, I'm sure at least the 3% of that was due to the process. It wasn't due to the fact that the guy was a slacker. He's not going off taking a cigarette break off the warehouse dock. He's working. But the system isn't set up to allow him to do the work that he needs to do properly, so he's essentially picking a red bead, and he's getting beaten up for it.
Getting beat up,
which is not right.
Speaking of Deming.
Speaking of Deming, that's right. Good transition there, just came to me. Okay, yes, we're going to talk about Deming now, because last weekend the W. Edwards Deming Institute hosted its annual fall conference. They do this every year, and this time it was from Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana. A major theme of this year's conference was the issue of sustainability and how it fits in with Deming's system of profound knowledge that we all know about and talk about a lot. So to talk further about the conference, as well as the ongoing relevance of Dr. Deming's work, we're going to be joined now by Kelly Allen, who's a senior associate at Kelly Allen Associates and an advisory board member of the Deming Institute. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. Well, we want to talk about the fall conference a little bit because, from all indications, the conference this year was very, very successful. So you were there. What were some of your takeaways from last weekend at Purdue?
Well, I know there are a bunch of takeaways, but I wanted first to say, listening to your two main stories related to jobs, the welder example, and then to the forklift picker, both of those things relate to Deming and sustainability. So when you go to a Deming conference, you can expect to notice that the theme, in this case the theme was sustainability, goes beyond the typical, because the people who are in attendance and the people who are presenting are using the four lenses of the system of profound knowledge to dial in on those issues in a creative and interesting way. So one of the papers that was presented had to do with true sustainability of product, whether it's clothing, automobiles, you name it, carpeting, so that everything is 100% recyclable. That, believe it or not, relates to the two examples you were just talking about, because it's about sustainability, and sustainability of jobs, sustainability of joy in work, in the case of your forklift driver. So at the Deming Conference, you also hear about sustainability related to those kinds of things and to learning, for example. So it's not only the environment, it's not only the carrying capacity of the earth, it's also about organizations and sustaining organizations. And that dialing in of understanding variability, understanding psychology, understanding how to lead a system, and understanding variation. Did I say variation? Variation psychology, leading a system, and theory of knowledge puts a different slant on each of the topics. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I can go into a couple more details.
No, I think that's great. And maybe you can get a little further into it, because I'm curious, this event, as we know, always has a great base of attendees. The people are passionate, they're knowledgeable, they're great high-level practitioners, and I'm sure, I have not attended personally, but I'm sure as someone who's attended many times, you would be impressed by what you learn each year and the interaction you have with those people. So what did you learn this year? What did you hear from people and find out that educated you?
There are a number of great takeaways. One of the things, I personally was not familiar with Donella Meadows' work on how to what's called intervene into a system to improve it. And I think she has 12 points of places of intervention. And one of the speakers talked about a lot of her work. So that was a big aha discovery for me. It's probably in part fairly academic, but from what I've seen, it's that academic point of view and the quality of her thinking and the quality of her research is very practical to the kind of examples you were just talking about with what do we do about jobs and pay and training, and what do we do about optimizing joy at work and also drive down costs in an organization without punishing people for things that are happening in the process or the system. So something with a topic like sustainability that also touches on the sustainability of learning and as well as the sustainability of the environment and the carrying capacity of the earth. I'm always struck by how relevant, how potent Dr. Deming's the famous cycle, the famous way to make things better and better and better. So you can call it magic. You can call it the Deming chain reaction, which is what it's often referred to. But when you're focusing on improvement and on quality, you end up with higher productivity as well as higher quality, and costs go down. So that was the magic thing that he described that changed the world in a really big way. Yes, the quality tools and understanding what a control chart will tell us, and a Pareto chart and histograms, flow charts, etc. But they all fit under that big umbrella of the Deming chain reaction that quality and productivity are the same thing if you're using the Deming management method and the quality tools. Yep. So in the case of your welder and pay example, if we look at that issue only from the standpoint of, well, is it pay? What are the economics? But if we look at it from a point of view of how can we improve this system to make it more sustainable? And we all control something. So the organization leaders, as well as the welders and everyone else in the organization, control some things. And if they start thinking about the Deming chain reaction, they'll find plan, do, study, act cycles that they can use to make sure that workers can get paid more, if that's one of the outcomes that we're looking for, that costs can be driven down, the quality will continue to improve. That's the magic, and I think it's too often lost or forgotten.
And Kelly, did we lose Kelly?
And so that came out again at
Well, Kelly, I'm glad to hear you talk about sustainability, because we always think about sustainability, I think many people do, as one unique environmental aspect. But really, you're talking about sustainability, and Deming was as well, that really goes well beyond just simply carrying capacity of the earth and being green. And it's something that's on everybody's lips right now. But how does the Deming system of profound knowledge support the concept of sustainability throughout the entire organization in all the elements of sustainability?
Well, one of the key elements of the Deming management method, the Deming management approach, is understanding the system, seeing into the system, and then leading the system. So you can look at your home and your family as a system. You can look at your neighborhood, your city, your county, your state, your country, the world as a system. And one of the great things about the Deming approach is those few guidelines that he provided, along with the tools for measurement and gaining insight, they scale up and down. They apply everywhere all the time. I mean, that's a big statement, and I'm sure there are some exceptions to that I'm not thinking of at this moment. But that scalability of a few rules gets us to what Dr. Taguchi used to talk about. What's the essential nature? So Deming was very helpful in getting us to the essential nature of the opportunity or the issue, rather than only looking at what presents itself on the surface. So the suggestion to use a control chart for the forklift picker, excellent idea, I would say. Excellent idea. It helps us see into the process, get insight about the process. And it's not only, I would say that the less important part is about trying to evaluate the worker, because the worker doesn't have that much influence. It's about what else will that control chart show us about how we can improve the process. And you mentioned, well, there's some software out there that might help do that. Well, there's a way to look into actually improving things further, which drives down costs, improves the carrying capacity, if you'll allow me to use that, of that organization and of those workers.
Now, Kelly, we're running out of time, so I apologize. But before we go, I know there's another interesting event coming up early in 2014, the 20th Annual International Deming Research Seminar. So quickly, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it'll be a great event. People come from all over the world, and I would encourage your viewers, listeners, subscribers to consider going to Deming.org, clicking on the upcoming events, and looking at what it takes to submit an abstract. The abstract's only 200 words. Now, you will have to write, if your paper's accepted, it's a juried seminar, but if your paper's accepted, then you'll have to, your abstract's accepted, then you'll have to write a paper for the presentation next year, March 3 and 4. But the whole purpose of that is to look at Dr. Deming's influence. So it can be academic research, it can be business case studies, it can be something related to politics, environment, urban planning, whatever it is. We have papers of all walks of life of people who are coming in who are not highly skilled Deming practitioners, but they understand how to look at the system of profound knowledge, an element of that, whether it's variation or learning or the systems thinking piece, and to apply that. In the papers, the presentations, only 20 minutes. All right. So we'd encourage people to apply, submit those abstracts by November 23rd, and it's an opportunity to participate in a great event in New York City and to learn and to just share in the idea exchange. Very, very exciting.
Terrific. Well, thanks. Kelly Ellen, the Senior
Associate with Kelly Ellen
Associates. Associate with Kelly Ellen Associates. I appreciate it.
That's right.
Kelly, thanks for joining us today and great information. You mentioned submitting papers. Is there a website?
Deming.org.
Yeah,
Deming.org.
Okay.
Yep. Go right at that. Great. Well, Kelly, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you down the road and continue to do that great work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Talk to you soon. All right. Well, that's going to be our show for this week. But before we go, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Olympus NDT. With the introduction of OmniScan SX, Olympus NDT continues to expand the coverage of the OmniScale family, making phased array technology more accessible and more affordable. For more information, visit online at www.olympus-imts.com or just click on the banner ad right below the player page right down there.
That's right. And I think that was Olympus-IMS.
Olympus-IMS.
Right there. IMDS is something different. Okay.
Olympus-IMS.
Just click the banner underneath the page. It's right down there. It'll take you to the same spot. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for whoever that was who
Kelly
sent
Allen?
us. Kelly Allen. Yes, thanks to Kelly
right.
Allen. Also, thanks to our viewer who sent in a question. Always encourage all of you to send in questions if you happen to think of one in our brief half-hour show. So once again, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah. You all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
So long.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.